They stole the obese girl's
Scoundrel and
inheritance and
ashamed.
called her stupid.
A
The mountain
pathetic
man
display.
made them apologize on their knees. The dust swirled in lazy spirals through the afternoon sun as Clara May stood outside the lawyer's office in Silver Ridge, a small frontier town nestled between jagged mountains and endless desert. Her hands trembled as she clutched the letter that had summoned her here, a letter informing her of her parents' death and the inheritance they'd left behind. She had traveled 3 days by stagecoach from the boarding house where she'd been working as a seamstress, her meager savings barely covering the fare. The town looked hostile even in daylight, with weathered buildings leaning against each other like drunken gamblers and suspicious eyes tracking her every movement down the dusty main street. Clara had always been larger than other girls. It was a fact she'd lived with her entire life, enduring cruel whispers and sideways glances. But her parents had loved her fiercely, telling her that her worth lay not in her appearance, but in her sharp mind and kind heart. Now they were gone, victims of a fever that had swept through their mining camp, and she was alone. The lawyer's office door swung open before she could knock. A thin man with wire spectacles and a perpetual frown gestured her inside. "Miss Thornton? Come in, come in. We have much to discuss." Inside, Clara's stomach dropped. Seated around the small office were faces she recognized from her childhood: Uncle Silas, Aunt Gertrude, and her cousins Robert and Margaret. They hadn't bothered to attend her parents' funeral, yet here they sat, dressed in their finest clothes, looking at her with barely concealed contempt. "Clara," Uncle Silas said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "How good of you to finally arrive. We were just discussing your parents' estate." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Thornton, your parents left you their mining claim, their cabin, and approximately $3,000 in savings. It's a considerable sum." Clara's eyes widened. $3,000 was a fortune. She could buy a small home, start a business, live comfortably for years. However, the lawyer continued, glancing nervously at Uncle Silas, there are certain complications. "Complications?" Clara's voice was steady despite her racing heart. Aunt Gertrude leaned forward, her lips pursed. "Dear child, you must understand. A young woman of your station cannot possibly manage such affairs alone. The mining claim requires oversight. The money needs proper investment. You've had no education in these matters." "I can read and write better than most," Clara said quietly. "My father taught me mathematics and bookkeeping." Robert, her cousin, laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Reading recipes and sewing patterns hardly qualifies you to run a mining operation, Clara. Let's be honest. You're not equipped for this." "What Robert means," Uncle Silas interjected smoothly, "is that we're family. We want to help. Sign over the claim and the money to me, for safekeeping, of course. I'll manage everything, and you'll receive a generous monthly allowance. You can return to your boarding house, continue your sewing. It's a simple solution." Clara looked at each face in turn. She saw no love there, no genuine concern, only greed masquerading as charity. "And if I refuse?" The lawyer coughed. "Miss Thornton, your uncle has already filed a petition with the territorial court claiming you're mentally unfit to manage the inheritance. He has witnesses who will testify to your limitations." "Limitations?" Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "What limitations?" Margaret, who had been silent until now, smiled sweetly. "Oh, Clara, everyone knows you're simple. It's not your fault. You were born that way. Uncle Silas is only trying to protect you from yourself." The words struck like physical blows, simple, stupid, limitations. These were the same insults that had followed her throughout childhood, weaponized now to steal her birthright. "I see," Clara said, her voice cold. She turned to the lawyer. "When is the hearing?" 3 days hence. But, Miss Thornton, I must advise—" "Thank you. I'll be there." She walked out of the office with her head high, ignoring the smug looks her relatives exchanged behind her back. That evening, Clara sat in the shabby room she'd rented at the boarding house, staring at the documents the lawyer had reluctantly given her. The evidence seemed damning. Uncle Silas had gathered statements from townspeople claiming she was slow-witted and incapable of basic reasoning. Most were people who had never spoken more than a few words to her, basing their judgments solely on her appearance. She knew what would happen at the hearing. The judge would see a large woman standing against respected members of the community. He would hear the testimonies, see the confident smiles of her uncle and cousins, and rule against her. The law, she was learning, favored those who already had power. Clara made a decision. If they wanted to steal from her, they would have to work harder for it. Before dawn, she slipped out of the boarding house with her few possessions bundled in a worn carpetbag. She'd spent the night studying the crude map her father had drawn of the mining claim. It was deep in the mountains, a day's ride from town. If she could reach it, she might find something, anything, that could help her fight back. The problem was, she had no horse and little money. The stagecoach wouldn't take her off the main route, and hiring a guide was out of the question. She would have to walk. The journey was brutal. Clara had grown up in town, not wilderness. Her boots, made for city streets, rubbed blisters on her heels within the first hour. The sun beat down mercilessly as she climbed narrow trails that wound up into the mountains. She rationed her small supply of bread and cheese, knowing it had to last. By nightfall of the first day, she was lost. The map made sense in theory, but the reality of endless pine forests and unmarked paths was overwhelming. She made camp in a small clearing, too exhausted and frightened to eat. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness, the howl of wolves, the crack of branches, the rustle of unseen creatures. Clara huddled by her small fire, fighting tears. Perhaps her relatives were right. Perhaps she was foolish, stupid even, to think she could survive out here alone. But the alternative, surrendering her parents' legacy to those vultures, was unthinkable. The second day was worse. Her water ran out by mid-morning, and panic began to set in. She followed what she thought was a stream marked on the map, but it led her deeper into unfamiliar territory. Her legs ached, her feet were bleeding, and exhaustion made every step an ordeal. She was struggling up a steep incline when her foot slipped on loose gravel. Clara tumbled backward, rolling down the slope, branches tearing at her dress and skin. She came to rest at the bottom, bruised and gasping, her ankle throbbing with sharp pain. Tears finally came then, hot and bitter. She had failed. She would die out here, and her relatives would get everything. They would shake their heads sadly and say they'd tried to save poor, stupid Clara from herself. "You planning to lie there all day, or you got somewhere to be?" Clara's head snapped up. A man stood a few yards away, so still she hadn't noticed him. He was tall and powerfully built, with a thick beard and hair that fell past his shoulders. He wore buckskin clothing and carried a rifle with casual ease. His eyes, a startling blue against his weathered face, studied her with neither sympathy nor judgment. I'm lost," Clara managed. "That's plain enough." He moved closer, and she noticed he walked with the quiet grace of someone who belonged in these mountains. "You hurt bad?" "My ankle. I think I twisted it." He knelt beside her, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he examined her foot through her torn boot. "Swollen, but not broken. You're lucky." He glanced at her face for the first time, his expression unreadable. "What's a woman doing out here alone?" Clara's first instinct was to lie, but something in his directness made her choose honesty. "Running. From people who want to steal from me." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That's so." Over the next hour, as he built a fire and boiled pine needle tea for her to drink, Clara told him everything: the inheritance, her relative's betrayal, the court hearing she was now going to miss, her desperate attempt to reach the mining claim. He listened without interruption, occasionally adding wood to the fire. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Name's Elias Boone. I trapped these mountains, been living up here near 10 years. I know your daddy's claim, passed by it many times. He was a good man, one of the few who didn't try to shoot at me for being too close to his diggings." "You knew my father?" "Met him a few times. He talked about his daughter, said she had a mind sharp as a steel trap." Elias's eyes held hers. "He never said nothing about you being stupid." Something in Clara's chest loosened at those words. "I'm not stupid." "Didn't figure you were. Stupid folks don't use words like weaponized and legacy the way you do." He stood, brushing off his buckskins. "Your ankle needs rest. You can stay at my cabin tonight. Tomorrow, if you're able, I'll take you to your daddy's claim." "Why would you help me?" Elias looked out at the darkening forest. "Your daddy once shared his food with me when I was down on my luck. Didn't have to. Most folks cross the trail when they see me coming. Figure I owe him. Besides," he added, his voice hardening, "I got no use for thieves and bullies." Elias's cabin was a sturdy structure built into the side of a hill surrounded by towering pines. Inside, it was surprisingly neat, with furs for warmth, dried meat hanging from the rafters, and shelves lined with handmade tools. He gave Clara his bed, a frame built into the wall with a straw mattress, while he took blankets by the fire. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the wind whistle through the trees. For the first time in days, she felt safe. This strange mountain man had shown her more kindness in an afternoon than her own family had in years. In the morning, Elias examined her ankle again. The swelling had gone down, and though it was tender, she could walk. He fashioned a walking stick from a sturdy branch and led the way through the forest with confident strides. They reached her father's claim by mid-afternoon. Clara's heart sank when she saw it. The cabin was barely standing, one wall collapsed inward. The mine entrance was partially caved in. Everything looked abandoned and worthless. "Don't judge it yet," Elias said, reading her expression. "Let's look inside." They spent the rest of the day searching through the cabin's remains. Clara found her mother's jewelry box, waterlogged but intact, and several of her father's journals. But it was Elias who made the important discovery. "Clara, come here." He was kneeling by the collapsed wall, pulling away rotted boards. Underneath was a metal strongbox, carefully hidden. Clara's hand shook as she used the key from her mother's jewelry box to open it. Inside were documents, deeds, survey reports, and assay certificates. Her father's mine wasn't just a small claim. According to these papers, it sat on a rich vein of silver that extended far beyond the boundaries her uncle knew about. There were also letters, contracts with buyers in San Francisco, and bank statements showing her father had been much wealthier than anyone realized. "This is it," Clara whispered. "This is proof. Uncle Silas doesn't know about any of this. He thinks it's just a played-out mine and a little savings." Elias studied the papers over her shoulder. "These documents say your daddy filed an expanded claim 6 months before he died. That means the mine boundaries are triple what's on the public record. Your uncle's trying to steal a fortune." Clara felt hope surge for the first time in days. "I need to get back to Silver Ridge. The hearing already passed. You missed it. Then they've won. Maybe, maybe not." Elias's expression was thoughtful. "Judges can overturn decisions if new evidence comes to light. But you need more than papers. You need witnesses, people who'll speak for you." "Who would do that? Everyone in town thinks I'm—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Stupid," Elias said bluntly. "That's because they don't know you. Time to show them different." Over the next 2 days, Elias and Clara worked together to secure the evidence and plan the return to Silver Ridge. Clara discovered that Elias, despite his isolated lifestyle, had a sharp, strategic mind. He'd learned to read from his mother, a school teacher who died when he was young, and he'd educated himself through books he traded for with passing merchants. "Why did you leave civilization?" Clara asked one evening, as they sat by the fire at his cabin. Elias was quiet for a moment. "War. I fought for the Union, saw things that made me not want to be around people anymore. Mountains don't lie, don't betray, they just are." He looked at her. "But maybe I stayed away too long. Your daddy reminded me that not everyone's rotten." "You're a good man, Elias Boone." "Don't know about that, but I know right from wrong, and what's happening to you is wrong." As they talked late into the night, Clara felt something shifting inside her. She'd spent so much of her life feeling ashamed, less than, unworthy. But Elias looked at her and saw competence, intelligence, worth. He asked her opinions and listened to her ideas. When she explained her father's mining techniques based on what she'd read in his journals, Elias nodded with respect. "You've got your daddy's mind for business," he said. "That claim could make you wealthy if you manage it right." "I'll need help. I don't know anything about actually running a mine." "You'll learn. You're smart enough." He hesitated, then added, "And you'd have people you could trust to hire. Mountain folk, mostly. They don't care about appearances, just whether you're fair and honest." Clara smiled. "People like you?" "If you wanted." The way he said it, careful and almost shy, made her heart skip. She realized with sudden clarity that she'd grown to care for this gruff mountain man who'd saved her life and treated her with more respect than anyone in her so-called family. When they rode back to Silver Ridge 3 days later, Elias had traded furs for a horse and saddle for Clara. She was a different woman than the one who'd fled into the mountains. Her clothes were patched and dirty, her hair wild, but her eyes blazed with determination. The town was shocked to see her alive. The hearing had concluded with Uncle Silas being granted control of the estate, with Clara declared mentally incompetent. Her relatives had already begun selling off assets, pocketing the money. Clara marched straight to the lawyer's office, Elias a silent, imposing presence at her side. The lawyer blanched when he saw them. "Miss Thornton, we thought, that is, your uncle said." "My uncle said many things, I'm sure." Clara placed the strongbox on his desk. "I have new evidence regarding my father's estate. Evidence that proves not only my competence, but also the true value of what my relatives are trying to steal." The lawyer's eyes widened as he examined the documents. This is extraordinary. The claim is worth considerably more than $3,000, Clara finished. "I'm filing a motion to overturn the court's decision, and I'm pressing charges against my uncle for fraud and conspiracy to commit theft." Word spread through Silver Ridge like wildfire. By evening, half the town gathered outside the courthouse. Uncle Silas and his family arrived with their own lawyer, confident and smirking, expecting to dismiss Clara's challenge easily. The emergency hearing the next morning was packed. The territorial judge, a stern man named Blackwood, listened as both sides presented their cases. Uncle Silas's lawyer painted Clara as a delusional woman who'd been manipulated by a wild mountain man into making false claims. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood before the court, aware of every eye upon her, every whisper about her appearance, her supposed stupidity. But instead of shame, she felt power. She methodically presented each document, explaining the expanded claim boundaries, the assay report showing rich silver deposits, the contracts her father had negotiated. She cited specific mining laws and territorial regulations, demonstrating a knowledge that shocked everyone present. "Furthermore," Clara said, her voice ringing clear, "I have here sworn statements from 3 different assay offices confirming the value of my father's claim at over $50,000. My uncle knew, or should have known, this information existed. His claim that he was protecting me from a modest inheritance is revealed as the lie it is." Uncle Silas's face turned purple. "This is absurd. She's too simple-minded to have prepared this herself. That mountain savage must have—" "Careful," Elias said quietly from his seat, but his voice carried through the courtroom. It wasn't a threat exactly, but the steel in his tone made Uncle Silas step back. Judge Blackwood banged his gavel. "Order, Mr. Thornton. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." He turned to Clara. "Miss Thornton, these documents appear authentic. However, the original ruling was based on testimony that you lacked the mental capacity for business affairs. How do you respond?" Clara took a deep breath. "Your Honor, the witnesses who testified against me based their opinions solely on my appearance. Not one of them could cite a single conversation where I demonstrated any actual incompetence. They assumed that because I don't look like other women, I must be less intelligent. But assumption is not evidence." "She's right," a voice called from the gallery. Clara turned, surprised, to see Mr. Henderson, the merchant who'd sold supplies to her father. He stood, hat in hand. "Begging the court's pardon, but I knew her daddy. He used to bring Clara to my store when she was little. She could calculate complex purchases in her head faster than I could with pencil and paper. Always was sharp as a tack." Another voice joined in, Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house. "I rented her a room. She kept her accounts perfectly, never a penny out of place. She was quiet and polite, but there wasn't nothing stupid about her." More people spoke up, most of them ordinary townspeople who'd had brief interactions with Clara. Not everyone supported her. Many remained silent or hostile, but enough spoke to create reasonable doubt. Judge Blackwood studied Clara for a long moment. "Miss Thornton, can you explain the difference between placer mining and hard rock mining?" Clara didn't hesitate. Placer mining recovers minerals from sediment deposits, typically in streams, using simple tools like pans and sluices. Hard rock mining, what my father did, extracts ore from underground veins using tunnels and requires more sophisticated techniques, including timbering, ventilation systems, and ore processing equipment. "And how would you calculate the operational costs of reopening your father's mine?" For the next 10 minutes, Clara answered increasingly complex questions about mining operations, business management, and territorial law. With each answer, she could see the judge's expression change from skepticism to respect. Finally, Judge Blackwood raised his hand. "That's sufficient." He looked at Uncle Silas. "Mr. Thornton, your petition claimed your niece was mentally incompetent. Based on what I've witnessed today, that claim appears not only false, but malicious. I'm overturning my previous ruling. Clara May Thornton is granted full control of her inheritance." The courtroom erupted. Uncle Silas lurched to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't—" "I can and I have," Judge Blackwood said sharply. "Furthermore, I'm ordering you to return any funds you've already taken from the estate, with interest. Miss Thornton, do you wish to press charges for fraud?" Clara looked at her uncle, at his red face and hateful eyes, at Aunt Gertrude's venomous expression and her cousin's shocked dismay. Part of her wanted to see them punished to the fullest extent of the law, but another part, the part her parents had nurtured, wanted something else. "I want a public apology," Clara said. "Here, before everyone, I want them to acknowledge what they tried to do and apologize for it." Uncle Silas sputtered. "I will not." "Then you will face criminal charges," Judge Blackwood said coldly. "The territorial prison is not a pleasant place, Mr. Thornton. Your choice." The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Silas looked around the courtroom seeking support, but found only accusing stares. Even those who testified against Clara looked uncomfortable now, realizing they'd been used. Finally, his shoulders slumped. "I apologize." "Louder," Clara said, "and on your knees." Gasps filled the courtroom. It was a humiliating demand, but Clara's voice was steady and cold. This wasn't cruelty, it was justice. They had tried to destroy her, to steal everything her parents had built, while calling her stupid and worthless. Uncle Silas's jaw worked, but slowly he sank to his knees. Aunt Gertrude followed, weeping with rage and shame. Robert and Margaret came last, their faces burning. "I apologize," Uncle Silas said, his voice strangled, "for trying to steal your inheritance and for calling you incompetent. You are not stupid. I was wrong." One by one, the others repeated similar words. Clara stood above them, feeling no triumph, only a tired sadness. This was her family, and they had betrayed her completely. When they finished, she turned to Judge Blackwood. "I won't press charges if they leave Silver Ridge within 3 days and never contact me again." The judge nodded. "So ordered. Mr. Thornton, you and your family are banished from this territory. If you're found within 50 miles after 3 days, you'll be arrested." As her relatives slunk out of the courtroom, Clara finally let herself lean against Elias. His hand found hers, steady and warm. The aftermath was strange. Clara became something of a sensation in Silver Ridge and the surrounding territories. The story of the obese girl who'd outsmarted her greedy relatives and won her fortune spread quickly, though the more Clara became known, the less people focused on her appearance and more on her accomplishments. She reopened her father's mine with Elias's help, hiring fair wages for experienced miners. The silver vein proved even richer than the assay report suggested. Within 6 months, the operation was profitable. Within a year, Clara was one of the wealthiest women in the territory. But wealth wasn't what changed her life. It was Elias. He'd planned to return to his cabin after the trial, but Clara convinced him to stay and help manage the mine. "I trust you," she told him, "and I need someone who won't try to cheat or control me." "I'm not a businessman," he'd protested. "No, but you're honest and hard-working. That's more valuable than any amount of experience." Slowly, carefully, their partnership became something more. Elias taught Clara to ride, to track game, to read the weather in the mountains. She taught him to navigate the complex social world of business, to negotiate contracts, to see beyond simple survival, to building something lasting. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, they sat on the porch of the new cabin Clara had built near the mine. The sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and purple. "I was thinking," Elias said, his voice gruff with emotion, "that maybe I could stay. Permanently." Clara's heart raced. "I'd like that. As your husband, I mean, if you'd have me." She turned to look at him, this fierce, gentle man who'd saved her life and never once made her feel anything less than worthy. "Elias Boone, are you asking me to marry you?" "Reckon I am. I know I'm not much." She kissed him, stopping his words. When they parted, she was smiling. "You're everything. Yes, I'll marry you." The wedding was small, held in the mountains with only a handful of friends present. Clara wore a simple blue dress and wild flowers in her hair. Elias had trimmed his beard and looked uncomfortable in clean clothes, but his eyes shone with unmistakable love. Mrs. Chen, who'd become a friend, cried happy tears. Mr. Henderson gave them a set of fine china as a gift. Even Judge Blackwood attended, nodding with approval, as Clara and Elias stood together, promising to face life's challenges side by side. Clara thought of her parents. They would have loved Elias, she knew. They would have been proud of how she'd fought for her inheritance and won not just wealth, but respect. The town's attitude toward Clara changed completely over time. She became known not for her appearance, but for her sharp business sense, her fair treatment of workers, and her generosity to those in need. When Silver Ridge needed a new schoolhouse, Clara funded it. When miners were injured, she made sure their families were cared for. Some people still whispered, still judged, but Clara had learned a powerful truth. Their opinions only had the power she gave them. She'd been called stupid, incompetent, worthless, and she'd proven every insult wrong not by changing who she was, but by refusing to accept their false limitations. Years later, when Clara and Elias had built not just a successful mining operation, but a whole community around it, a young woman came to her for advice. The girl was thin and scarred from smallpox, made to feel ugly and unmarriageable by her family. Clara listened to her story, hearing echoes of her own past in every word. When the girl finished, Clara took her hand. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way," Clara said. "People will try to make you small to make themselves feel big. They'll try to steal from you, your money, your confidence, your dreams. Don't let them. You are not what they say you are. You are what you know yourself to be." "But how do I fight them?" Clara smiled, thinking of a mountain man who'd once asked her if she planned to lie in the dirt all day. You stand up, you find people who see your worth, and you never, ever apologize for taking up space in this world. The girl left with hope in her eyes, and Clara returned to her home where Elias was waiting, their two children playing in the yard they'd built together. She'd been stolen from, insulted, called stupid and worthless. But she'd stood up. She'd fought back. And she'd won not just her inheritance, but something far more valuable. A life built on love, respect, and unshakable self-worth. The mountains stood eternal around them, and in their shadow, Clara May Boone had found exactly where she belonged.